Well, hopefully we can get that going a little bit more because we have exactly one PowerPoint. This is going to be a conversation and a real panel discussion. So let me go ahead and by introducing myself, the panel that we have here today, and kind of the principles that we want to go through. So first of all, my name is Ben Anderson. I'm the Amazon Global Relationship Manager, if you will, and part of the team that's building our voice practice for Applause. If you don't know who Applause is, the quick commercial on us, 300,000 real-world testers across virtually every device and language. So what's really compelling about voice, just like mobile, but even more so, the unlimited amount of use cases that folks who are developing and bringing skills, AVS, Google, all those elements to bear, you have to test across dimensions we never thought of, right? So that kind of leads us into the talk that we wanted to put together today. And really, if you think about it, mobile is where probably a lot of us come from, or we have experience in that. We certainly have with digital. Voice is this piece that is rapidly becoming a first-class citizen. So when we put the panel discussion together, we thought to ourselves, hey, let's get some people who really know voice and who are really developing skills that are truly first class, meaning they have to have engagement, true engagement. So I'm really excited about the panel we have here and what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about some principles of really how do you actually do design, how do you actually measure, and then how do you optimize for voice. Again, a lot of us probably come from mobile backgrounds, but the dimensions we are seeing are fundamentally different and it's moving faster and faster. So let me just do a quick introduction of our panel. I've got Nathan Treloar, which is Cornish, by the way. I wanted it to be French, but it's Cornish. Founder and CTO of Orbita, conversational AI platform, voice platform for healthcare. And so they've got customers like American Red Cross, Merck, Amgen, and others. And so, Nathan's got a real passion for how do you humanitize and actually make voice something that's not just a command and an output. I've got Ian Botts here, who, if you ever get a chance, you will find out he's literally the most interesting man in the world. So Ian is the VP of Technology for Audible, longtime Amazonian. I'm going to let him speak to his history with Alexa. I also consider Ian a friend as well as a partner. He's been a big fan of Applause, so really excited to have him up here. And then we've got Emerson Sklar, who is the youngest person, the best looking and the best dressed of the three of us. But you will not believe it, but Emerson actually has a background in the Army in intelligence, which somehow he found his way to Applause after a history at Borland. So what's really interesting about Emerson is he's our technical evangelist, and he's actually leading up our practice for Applause around voice. But if you get a minute, grab Emerson, because Emerson has probably worked with every leading global digital brands, from the American Expresses, the Disneys of the world, the Amazons of the world, everyone you can see. And so he has a point of view on what quality really means and how to apply it for real-world testing. So to get started, my goal is to get out of the way. Ian, I think we wanted to talk, and have you kind of open it up with, if you start to look at design for voice, you've been around it and you had some great stories. So why don't you kick us off in terms of your perspective of what voice means today and how people should be thinking about it?
Sure, and I think I can start that off with just maybe a touch of a history lesson. Does anyone here, have you guys heard how Alexa came to be? It's no hands. It's very famous how the e-ink fires came about, right? Jeff said, I want every book available in human history in 60 seconds anywhere in the world, and that spawned a Kindle Fire, the e-ink tablets, right? It's a little bit more murky with how did Alexa come to be? And I think Alexa's a far more interesting story. The Alexa, this whole voice assistant universe that's come out from Amazon, really started from watching reruns of Star Trek, very near and dear to my heart. Rohit Prasad sort of helped found this whole thing, and this came from the idea that, well, if on this TV show they're talking to the computer, why can't we talk to it? And from there, a secret project started, and before Alexa had a name, and she even had a code name, we started talking about how do we interact with this computer. And we envisioned and built this very early on. I got to be part of the very early team in the project to work with it. We very much envisioned it as some type of command interface, very much like Star Trek. I'm a huge Star Trek fan too. I got the Klingon tattoo right there to prove it. Done at a Star Trek convention. And maybe we'll do one here at the voice convention. We'll get a tattoo parlor going. But we started off that way, and we really quickly became sort of to understand that that interaction model did not have longevity. We couldn't just say, computer do this, computer do that, right? What we started to crave was some type of interaction model, a conversation. We wanted context and this ability to talk to us. And I think what we're seeing today is a very early version, we were discussing this earlier, an early version 1.0 of that interface. We have a little bit of context now. We're starting to get relevant information in return. We have these developers and engineers and business people from around the country and around the world who are really starting to deeply think about this and develop skills for different specialty areas like you in the healthcare field, and starting to come up with ideas on how to interact with this. And I think as we move forward into this sort of 2.0, and you're going to see this starting as a theme through the course of the next 2 days here, we're really going to start talking about contextual speech. We're going to talk about conversational speech, and we're going to talk about how to position data so that data is available at the fingertips very, very quickly. And I think that that's going to be a sort of a kingpin of some of our conversations today.
Yeah.
So hopefully that starts us off all right.
No, I think that's great. I mean, maybe the two of you were talking about back and forth, and Audible obviously has a rich history in voice by the nature of what it is and everything. Can you talk a little bit about the differences around just mobility and then how you should be thinking about voice? And I think that leads us into where Nate is designing for the American Red Cross of the world and what that actually means, and how you think differently, and how you have to actually ask some different questions.
So I joined Audible 2.5 years ago, and I came from Amazon. And Audible is an experiential voice company. We make our money through selling audio content, right? We're the spoken word. And even us and we have this wonderful position, we're first party. So we have the ability to interact very deeply with the Alexa speech teams and the domains, and we're a domain in our own right. And even there, I wouldn't say struggled, but we've had to put a lot of resources, a lot of thought, and a lot of time into how we build this domain, this lexicon, how we optimize for search, how we narrow content to allow our consumer to be able to interact with our service. And it's iterative, it's taken time, we're in a good place today, but even for us, we have a long way to go, and we have a lot on the horizon. And I think as we were talking earlier, right, we were talking about this sort of idea of what happens when you get, you said you had a survey, right? You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So as Ben pointed out, we focus on healthcare. And by the way, we all have booths up in the exhibit hall, Orbita, Applause, and Audible, so come check it out. We focus on healthcare, and there are some use cases in healthcare that require sort of special attention. I don't think it's unique to healthcare in particular, but the one anecdote I was sharing with the guys before we came out here was a survey, an assessment survey. It turned out for patients with rheumatoid arthritis, if they're in a clinical trial, there's a survey or an assessment they have to do on a regular basis that asks them how easy it is to do certain things around the house. How easy was it today to pick up a glass of water? How easy was it to get dressed, to button your shirt? And their response on a scale of 0 to 10 informs the clinicians who are caring for these individuals, right? It also informs them how well they're progressing. Well, one of the questions on this survey was, which of the following 50 symptoms have you had over the last week? And on the paper form, it's just a bunch of check boxes, right? Well, the challenge in voice is how do you take those experiences, whether it's paper or even digital on a form on a website or mobile app, and convert it into voice? Well, I don't need to tell you that you don't just take 50 questions and say, stop me when I say a symptom you have. You have to think differently. Voice is different. We all know that. We wouldn't be here if we didn't recognize that it is different. So what we do at Orbita is when we approach projects like that, we make it clear to our clients that we need to think differently. You can't take 2 pages of text on a website and stick it into an Alexa response. You have to think about what is the interaction model. So that was an anecdote that we talked about, and I think and the theme of this panel is really around how do you approach voice from a user experience point of view. I think it's very clear that as a group, and I point to everybody in this room who are doing voice, we drastically underestimate how much work needs to go into thinking about the user experience up front and getting that right. So
Maybe this will probably lead into Emerson a little bit on the feedback. So Nate, you develop that voice, you're bringing it out, you realize it's mission critical from the stuff. So how are you actually getting that feedback, and what have you kind of the lessons you've learned around what needs? We talked about things like multimodal, where you've got form factors and voices traveling, and we're abstracting the actual device layer. So maybe talk a little bit about your experience around that.
Well, tell you what we've learned and what we do now, and then maybe you can comment on sort of measurements. I think I cut out for a second there. So what we've learned is, like I said, you got to plan for it. You got to think about the user experience up front. And in the early days when we were doing this, we would write out the user experience, write it down, like in electronic form, and we'd share it with our clients, and they would sign off on it. And it turns out that they signed off on the modality of text, not voice. And so it's critical from a prototyping point of view to make sure that there is a stage in the project where they're listening to what's being said in the voice experience, and that what we've done in our technology is providing these prototyping tools where you can actually listen to the interaction. There are other sort of cheap ways of doing it that go back to the early days of user experience design, sort of the Wizard of Oz type of technique where you have almost literally somebody behind the curtain that is a proxy for the voice assistant before it's been actually developed. And they will listen to the input from the user and kind of say back what the script says they should say back, and then there's an assessment of that experience. But doing that early and thinking about how to deliver that voice prototyping is a critical stage. We also have particular artifacts that we create during the design stage. We design the grammar, which is in the parlance utterances that map to a particular intent. We design the voice user experience, which is what's the full interaction model. And then we also design, there's a third thing, actually we design the conversational flow. So there's 3 things that we put into every project.
And I think where we came across with Nate's company was we have a joint customer that they put these, a couple of skills out there that are rather robust. And on the back end, we're the testing piece. And so maybe Emerson, talk a little bit about your experience as a technical evangelist, right? When we look at quality, engagement, multimodal, we look at monetization, which are the core KPIs that Amazon's driving for their customers, and a little bit about how that needs to be approached from intents and all those different elements.
Sure. So you and I have worked together for a good while now. I think I'm pretty passionate about using real people to get a lot of this activity done. I came from an automation background. There's extraordinary value, especially in the voice world, extraordinary value in conducting automation, but with the near infinite complexity that you get from the different accents, dialects, the different environmental conditions, the different modalities of interaction with these user experiences, the really best and primary way to figure out what your customer's sentiment is, to get what that real world perspective is, to test with real people in the real world. We do some testing with a major American auto manufacturer, testing the Connect voice experience, testing the infotainment system, things like that. We found that customer sentiment, people really wanted to use it. The expectation for them to be able to use this was actually a pretty big selling point for people buying the cars that had these more advanced infotainment systems. What we found was that for some types of experiences, that the engagement model, the interaction, was maybe not one that was very responsible or very effective to use while you're in a car. It's good to be able to listen to music, good to be able to do things like that while you're in a car, not so good to watch YouTube videos or play video games on your infotainment system as you're driving along. But then we found that actually for a huge portion of their customer base, for people that had thick Southern or Appalachian accents, that it really struggled interpreting what words they were saying. Alexa, AVS did not struggle to interpret those same commands. if you're sitting at home, sitting in a lab, speaking directly to one of these Echo devices, really did start to struggle when you're in an automobile trying to speak to that. That hits near and dear to my heart. I come from West Virginia, where people have real thick accents, so being able to ensure that, that those people have specific access to this functionality, being able to ensure that those types of people who actually represent a pretty significant part of the customer base for this auto manufacturer is extremely valuable. I think the other part of it is that we are all obviously tech first here, or we're taking the steps to become tech first and become voice first. And while that gives us a great perspective on the marketplace, gives us great perspective on some of the challenges that we're interacting, it doesn't necessarily make us the best advocates for our real customers. So there's a great Statista survey that they did, where one of the fascinating charts they put together is the things that are preventing people from making purchases with smart speakers. And so I think, okay, what's going to prevent me from making a purchase with a smart speaker? And for me, it's thinking about not being able to see the item. I can go on Amazon, I can look at the item, I can see all the user reviews, I can flip through and see it from the back and the front, think, okay, that's really going to work. I can use the new camera functionality to be able to see how it's going to look in my house. That's all great. For the vast majority of people, that wasn't even in the top 5 reasons why they would not make a purchase on a smart speaker. The number 1 reason was concern over privacy and security, of securely transmitting their payment information over a connected device back to whoever the merchant was and being able to complete that purchase. Similar to what we did in the mobile world 5-8 years ago, that type of revolution that we had as that was first becoming much more significant, but it's something that, you know, really without seeing the data, without seeing the data just anecdotally would not really occur to me, but is apparently something that is very significant to our potential customers, and is an indication that using those customers, finding direct feedback from them with UX studies, with beta community groups, finding that direct customer feedback really is the best way to get that perspective.
I just want to tie back something that I think both of you kind of touched on with the UX, as well as with sort of the testing aspect, and being very, you know, customer obsessed and customer centric. You guys have to remember, as you're building your skills, as you're building a voice first application set, you guys are testing a set of statistical algorithms that live in the cloud, right? That's what Alexa is. Alexa's a big set of statistical algorithms and machine learning, deep neural networks, and you can't just test and validate the same way that you would your web page, right? You can't just sit there and write a bunch of unit tests or integration tests and expect the same output every time. As you mentioned, there's this infinite complexity to just the range of human voices, environments, the technologies or the multimodal systems they're using, be it cell phones or an Alexa device or something of the microphone array. So really, you know, as much effort and thought that you put into your design, to your testing, and I love the black curtain idea, by the way, and I know that's something that a lot of customer service groups do when they're testing out scripts. But you need to spend the same amount of time in figuring out actually how your skill works, right? Context in voice is key. To trim down like at Audible, you know, we have hundreds of thousands of audio titles available in our catalog, and we grow at an exponential rate. How do we pare that information down and deliver it to our consumer on a voice front? You know, we can search on a web page, we have that down, but we've got a lot of the other information of you know, you read this, you might like this, you listen to that, your friends listen to this. But in a voice setting, we can't list out 50 things. I'd even say we can't list out 10.
Yeah. You may not want to list out any.
Exactly, you may not want to list out any, right? We have to figure out contextually what it is that you're looking for. So when you say, a great example, you say, Alexa, read me a bedtime story. What is your intent there? Are you looking for a child? Are you looking for a nursery rhyme? Are you looking for a new book to fall asleep? I listen to anything like narrated by Neil deGrasse Tyson. That's how I fall asleep. I love that man's voice, and I'll listen to his books over and over again. So when I say, he's great, isn't he? So when I say, Alexa, read me a bedtime story, that's what I want. Now, today, we haven't sorted that out, but that's really sort of, I think, a crux of a lot of what we're getting at here through testing, through UX design, through extreme focus. You can start to achieve these types of results for the skill or for whatever it is that you're building.
Yeah, I'll build on that. we talked about this before too. It's important to understand the audience who you're trying to reach, and in our case, we're often trying to reach elderly people, people who have chronic illness, or in some cases polychronic. They have multiple chronic illnesses. Actually, a really compelling demographic are people who are paralyzed or blind or otherwise unable to use traditional digital devices. I think both Ian and I have had the experience of working with people who are quadriplegics, and to see how empowered they are to use these new smart devices and to take some control of their life with the power of their voice is pretty special to see. I just want to make one point. I didn't think I answered sort of how we solved that problem with the 50 questions of symptoms. Like Ian said, it's not a solution to say, well, we're going to give you 5 at a time. The way we solved it was just to have the voice assistant say, have you experienced any symptoms in the last week? And to use natural language processing to parse what they said back. So if the patient said, well, yes, I had a rash on my left hip and my right big toe was sore. Parsing that information, codifying it, storing it, managing it that way is really the only way to deliver that experience for that assessment survey over voice. But to Ian's point, you got to think about this and understand and recognize that it is just fundamentally different.
See, I don't think there's a magic bullet, right? Like, there's no one particular way that you go and approach this, right?
I think that's what strikes me about voice, and we all grew up in this mobile-first world, right? And for the customers we call on, oftentimes we find the Alexa skills guys are either at some innovation lab over here, or a guy that launched the brochureware of Alexa. That is now, voice is becoming a competitive differentiator. Yeah. If it's going to become a competitive differentiator, what is your actual strategy? Are you looking at it from, hey, voice is something I do, or are you actually thinking through it the same way you did with mobile, but you got to have different dimensions, because those dimensions somehow have exponentially grown. So not only you have to test for the languages, the devices, you got to test for all that. And by the way, in most cases, you got to test for the companion app that supports the voice app that sits on everything.
That's an important point, because we also talk about modality, and if that word has come into your vernacular, that's great, because it's being used a lot now, but generally what modality means is different ways that you can interact with the digital experience. So you can use your voice, you can use touch, you can use a keyboard, you can use a mouse, you can use a VR helmet. These are the modalities of interaction, and voice is just one of them. We have a lot of customers who are starting to use these multimodal experiences where on a mobile phone, for example, the device is the phone. It could be an Amazon Echo Show, but the point is it's a device that has a screen and a microphone, and you interact with it in a multimodal way. You say things and you see things back. You can touch it. Planning and designing a user experience for multimodal interaction is becoming much more important. And our platform is now sort of a multimodal platform. We don't just talk about voice anymore. We talk about conversational experiences. So.
I think that is vital. Like we have, Audible, for example. Audible began as interaction either with a web interface or interaction with a mobile app as the primary means of users providing input, and audio being the sole means of users receiving the output. You guys began in the voice-first world, began kind of on the side of that curve. Now, a lot of organizations are making that change to where voice, like you said, can be a first-class citizen. It can be just as valuable, just as meaningful, just as worthy of a company's investment as an interaction model as really any of these others. And I'd be interested to see both technologically as well as generationally how that changes from we who grew up in the web or mobile first world to our children or to our children's children who are going to grow up on the other side of that curve.
I'll tell you, it's even affecting how we develop software. I threw this out a little earlier, and I'll just share with you guys. So one of the things that, at Audible, we very much attempt to give our engineers enough white space to be able to spend time innovating. And I was at a demo just a few weeks ago, and at that demo, completely unbeknownst to me, I received this demo where a group of testers got together and built a skill for Alexa that enabled them to be able to run their automation tests on the device. And what was great about it is they didn't know the little history about Star Trek and Alexa. they actually created the Star Trek diagnostic program. So they sit there and they say, computer, or Alexa, because I said it say computer, but Alexa, run a level 3 diagnostic. And using voice profiles, using a little bit of logic, the device recognizes the developer on the team, points it to their latest binary and their personal cloud, and starts beginning running the appropriate tests for the level that they said. I never would have thought to ask someone to build something like that. But that's sort of the kind of the innovation that how voice is beginning to proliferate and not only change how we interact with consumers, but even how internally we're interacting with technology as technologists.
Yeah.
And I think that's where voice starts to get incredibly exciting, and fostering that level of innovation, fostering that type of sort of creativity within your organizations and allowing people to take those risks using this voice area, that's where you get these surprising things. After seeing that demo, I thought of about 10 different ways to apply this skill across software development around Amazon and how much time it could save.
I know we're running out of time. One more thing to say. So we talked about Star Trek, and it made me think of something that was on one of the Star Trek movies, about a quick anecdote. Years ago, a friend of mine had a 2-year-old daughter who was familiar with using iPads, and he showed her a newspaper, and her first instinct was to try to touch the newspaper to interact with it, right? And I expect that same thing to happen with voice. So somebody will have a device or someone, they'll try to speak to it with the assumption that it will know how to respond. And it reminded me, there's a scene in one of the Star Trek movies.
It's Star Trek: The Journey Home, the worst.
It's the worst movie. But is it Kirk who sits in a car? You know the story.
No, Scotty picks up, he's designing a tank to hold the whales. If you guys have to see this movie, if you haven't. And he picks up the mouse on a Mac Classic and starts talking into it, computer, because he's so used to telling the computer what to do.
I think there's another one where they sit in a car and they say, go. And the car doesn't respond, it doesn't have voice interaction. But anyway, the point here is that technology trains us as well, right? We all learn to use little touch screens. And we've seen that even my parents who are in their 80s have learned how to interact with Alexa. They pace their voice in order to interact with it. And it's just interesting to see how adaptable the human brain is.
All right, we are out of time, so we're going to wrap up. I was going to say the other place you can see is Zoolander, right? So they get on top of the computer and start jumping on top. So that's the other, they needed voice first.
It's another modality.
So just a couple quick things, right? How you actually design, how you actually measure, how you actually drive feedback. That's exponential. The other thing I would encourage you, if you are an Alexa Skills or AVS, really understand the Amazon KPIs and what that looks like. Happy to talk more about that. But let's give a big hand for Ian, Nate, and Emerson. Really appreciate their time. Really appreciate you joining us today.
Cool.